Thank you for joining Jackson Lewis as we take a closer look at the employment law trends and tactics sure to shape 2023. This installment is one of 12 concise, field-specific podcast episodes that are part of our annual forecasting favorite, The Year Ahead. We invite you and others at your organization to experience the report's legislative, regulatory, and litigation insights in full at our website, jacksonlewis.com, or listen to the podcast series at whichever platform you turn to for compelling content.
Katharine, I don't know about you, but I feel like there's been an explosion of accommodation requests that I think is going to continue into 2023.
Absolutely. It seems like every time our phone rings, it's a client calling and asking about how to handle a particular request.
I think it's probably the combination of COVID, the work from home that became so prevalent, and the vaccine issues that have really placed accommodation at the forefront. As a result, have really raised the accommodation IQ of employees to a point where now it seems like if an employee wants something and doesn't get it, they now find a medical or religious reason for why they should have it. Kind of like if you didn't get it from mom, go ask dad.
Absolutely. And I think now, as we'll talk in a few minutes, I think employers are also going to be facing an increase in requests for accommodation based on pregnancy with the new law that just got enacted on December 29th.
What new law is that?
That would be the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that was a part of the omnibus spending bill that got adopted.
They snuck that one in. What did they do?
It has absolutely nothing to do with government funding, of course. But essentially, what the law does is it says if you have an employee and that employee has a limitation on their ability to perform the essential functions of the job arising out of pregnancy, childbirth, or pregnancy-related medical conditions, then you have to provide a reasonable accommodation to that person, unless it would impose an undue hardship. So the law essentially borrows from the ADA and incorporates into the ADA the concepts of reasonable accommodation and undue hardship and the interactive process. But it's a big deal for employers because previously pregnancy alone didn't have to be accommodated. Whereas now, under the new federal law, we have a situation where if a pregnant employee has a physical or a mental limitation arising out of their pregnancy or a pregnancy-related medical condition, then they would have to be accommodated.
So pregnancy, disability, which we all know often just means medical condition, and religion need to be accommodated.
Yes. So you can see, it has become an explosion, right? Not only is it disability, it's pregnancy, it's religion, and I am sure we are going to continue to see tons more requests. I'm curious, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing when you get calls from clients right now?
I think realistically, the biggest challenge isn't so much the legal challenge, it's the frustration. Because of the explosion, because employers are seeing so many of these, and because we all know that there's some portion of those that might not be as legitimate as others. So I think employers as a whole are becoming very frustrated with the requests. I think they're becoming jaded by the requests. And I think there is some, fear and concern that these requests are being abused. And so individuals who don't really have a religious reason or a disability or now pregnancy, although that one's going to be a little harder to fake. But you've got employees that they know are using this as a way to get what they want, and that's causing frustration and problems, I think.
And I think you're absolutely right on that. But I also think that as an HR professional, right? It's the HR professional, it's their job, it's part of what they have to do. So as understandable as it may be, the frustration of having to deal with this increased number of accommodation requests, some of which are legitimate and some of which are not, they really have to work hard to make sure that they're consistently following the same process and giving each person the respect and the time that it takes to work through the accommodation request to see if it is in fact something that needs to be provided.
Yeah, we've always been talking for years when we do presentations and training. We always train the supervisor. What if they ask for, I want a pink pony? And the goal is to train them not to laugh, not to guffaw at it, but to take it on. Let me think about it. Let's talk about it. Because you're right. You don't want to make that initial judgment up front. You really want to give every request, even if it seems absolutely ridiculous, the time of day and the respect and
Right.
thought.
I mean, I always tell clients, it's like your first response should never be no, even though ultimately that might turn out to be your end response.
Well, Catherine, I mean, so think about the no. What if you've already provided the accommodation, but now you want to change or stop it? Can you do that?
So you can do that, much to the chagrin of the EEOC. But we have actually a case that's pending down in North Carolina right now that deals with that exact same issue. But make no mistake about it, an employer can change an accommodation that's been provided for some period of time, so long as the employer can point to and show what's changed, right? What has changed to make that accommodation no longer reasonable, or what has changed such that providing or continuing to provide that accommodation would create an undue hardship. And as long as you can do that, then you are, in fact, able to change a longstanding accommodation that's been in place. It's just all a matter of saying, hey, Patty, that accommodation that we've been, providing to you, let's sit down and talk about alternate accommodations that might work, because the prior accommodation is creating a problem for this reason.
Yeah. And I think that's always why it's often advisable to upfront talk about this is temporary. We're going to try this out, and never make it sound like this is a permanent thing, or give that entitlement to the employee where they think you can't ever take it away.
Right.
Just to set expectations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And these changes in circumstances can come from so many different angles, right? But again, employers aren't locked in to continuing to provide the same old accommodation. And in fact, I think that the law and the EEOC would want you to change. Just as if technology made a better accommodation available, we would want to see a change in that way. We would also expect to see a change in accommodation if a prior accommodation no longer were reasonable.
Or the employee no longer needed it.
That's absolutely another area. And, I think sometimes all of these different factors, they cause so much confusion for employers. They're trying to make sense of everything. Sometimes that can really slow down the process. Are you seeing any cases that are dealing with employers who take an inordinately long period of time to respond to a request for accommodation?
We are seeing a lot of challenges on that. Where employees are challenging, hey, you didn't respond immediately, you didn't respond promptly enough. And there can be issues there, but we have had some favorable court decisions in the last year that remind employers that sometimes, you do need to take some time. And I think it's more important than the length of time is that you're doing it right. And it's that process and actually engaging in that process. And remember, it's supposed to be an interactive process. So the back and forth, the discussion, the thoughtfulness, all of that, I think, helps in establishing your defense to these claims down the road. But I don't think you should get hung up on the time. But at the same time, you want to be reasonable, right? You don't want to just say, okay, thank you for the accommodation request. We'll get back to you next month. You want to make sure you're working on it in the meantime and communicating to the employee where you're at.
Right, because so many times the employee is left hanging. They have no idea what's going on in the HR department. So it's all about being a master communicator, right? I mean, if you're a great communicator, you're really going to make your employees feel like they're heard. And even if they disagree ultimately with the conclusion that you reach, they will respect that and will not feel so motivated to bring an action against you.
I think, with so many employment relations issues, communication really is the key. And I think here, both with the accommodation process, the interactive process, communicating with your employees, but I think the other part is also communicating with your TPA. If you've got a third-party administrator that's involved, either because they provide FMLA help, or sometimes they provide the accommodation help too. How important is the communication with that third-party administrator, that TPA?
It is absolutely critical, especially when you have a situation where, the employer has handed over, for instance, FMLA to the TPA, but then the employer is now making decisions based on whether or not they're going to provide a reasonable accommodation without consideration of where the TPA is in the process, because the TPA is your agent. And if your agent is doing something inconsistent or saying something, taking a position that's inconsistent with what the HR team is saying to the employee, that can do nothing but cause problems, right? And so I think it's really critical to form a partnership with your TPA to make sure that you're working together to take care of your employees' requests, whether they're for FMLA or for ADA reasons, so that that's a seamless process. And at the end of the day, every employee that you ever, depose, right, will say, well, I knew, this all started when my supervisor or my HR manager disrespected me. And it's all about respect, isn't it? I mean, as soon as they start to feel as though you've disrespected them, that pervades every other thing that happens in the future. And if you can become that great communicator with your employees and show the respect that you would want shown to yourself, right? If you were in that situation, I think you go just miles in terms of providing a great workplace for your employees, cutting down on possible charges and litigation, and just getting the job done.
As always, Katharine, you're right. But, I think we're kind of probably wrapping up time now. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to need an accommodation. Probably have to, cut out early today. Is there anything else that, that we could tell them?
No, I would say to you, Patty, that I'm sure that you do need that accommodation. And let's sit down and discuss that so that I can better understand what your needs are. There, how did I do?
I did well. My needs are, I need to take a break. We really appreciate everyone joining us today. This has been Patty Pryor and Katharine Weber, and we love to accommodate you.
Thank you for joining us for the Year Ahead 2023 Special Edition podcast series. Please tune in to the next episode where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. All of our Jackson Lewis podcasts are available to stream and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Libsyn, Pandora, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com. As a reminder, this material is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create a client-lawyer relationship between Jackson Lewis and any recipient.